What's up, y'all? How's everybody? Welcome to the 33rd episode of Josh Says Mean Things. Let's see if I can. Hey, look, it's me. It's me, Josh Baker, your host of Adobe Visuals Presents, sponsored by Topo Chico. Josh Says Mean Things. um, Today, we're going to be talking about Lightroom, obviously. Lightroom made a lot of big changes this year. And unbeknownst to me, they also made a change today. It doesn't really affect most of us. It's mostly built today around some of Lightroom Mobile and some of the web versions of it allows some things that the desktop versions have had for a while, but I thought I'd mention them. So, yay. Yeah. Let's see. Do comments show up? No. Still no. Still no. Still no. Alright, well, we'll figure that out later. Yeah, let's just go straight into, oh my gosh, Lightroom. Yeah, Mike. Mike. We're not getting a mic. Dang it. Oh my gosh. How's that, y'all? Can y'all hear me now? Ah, how about now? Do. Nope. Hey. Better. Yay, better. Yay. I never know how to work a microphone because that would be too easy. It'd be too easy if I knew how to do visual and audio. That'd be too simple. I could dominate the world. No. So what I was saying is today we're going to be talking about Lightroom. Welcome to the 33rd episode of Josh Says Mean Things. This is me, your host, Josh Baker, powered by Adobe Visuals, sponsored by, I wish, Topo Chico, because I like Topo Chico, especially on a hot June that we're going to be having for the rest of June. Oh my gosh, it's going to be so hot. I'm not looking forward to that whatsoever. But yeah, Lightroom actually, I scheduled this a week ago, and Lightroom today made a new update. It doesn't really affect us necessarily. It's mostly for the web and the mobile version, getting some tools that we've had in desktop for a while now. I haven't played with the new mobile version, but apparently it automatically you don't have to import anymore. It just automatically reads your phone gallery, whatever you allow it to read. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of a pain to always have to go and import when you're doing that. Yes. So if you have questions, I'll try to flip back and forth. I'm doing this on one screen today, but on a powerful computer because I'm going to be doing some denoise and things like that. Let's see. Very good. All right. Yay. Okay. Good. But what I wanted to talk about firstly is the fact that in April, Lightroom probably made some of its competitors not very happy by adding in a raw denoise that actually works. Lightroom has obviously had denoise tools for a long time, but they weren't very good. And so it allowed some third-party apps like Topaz and On1 to kind of come in with their own third-party software. And now the new Lightroom denoise is, I don't know that it's as good as theirs, but with it being in-app, I don't know that I'll be switching out a ton. Maybe for some, I'll show you an example. We'll see an example here in a minute. But just the fact that it exists on that level and that it will keep refining, I think is huge news. Right now, it only works on RAW files, like camera RAW files. It does not work on the like DNG or JPEG or Photoshop files or anything like that. It doesn't work on TIFFs yet. It's coming. It's not out yet. But that's the news for today. So we only have a couple of user submitted photos, but I'm using a lot of my photos. This is really more, this is less of a Josh Says Mean Things and more of a Learn Lightroom Live, but I kind of killed Learn Lightroom Live because I was just too much pressure. So we'll just consolidate everything into Josh Says Mean Things. We do have a couple, Steven and Jess, and a couple other people sent photos, but Steven, of course, threw me the curveball of curveballs that you'll see in just a second. So yeah, hi Evelyn, hi Bill, hi Binky, hi Burkich, hi Chris. Thank y'all for letting me know that you couldn't hear me. It's always that way for me. So, all right, let's flip over to Lightroom. I will try to flip over for the comments as you have them. The first thing we're going to do is that's a lot, is a landscape photo. Now, this is a photo I took in Big Bend a couple months ago. And so I thought I'd start with a landscape, because I know a lot of you guys love landscapes. And this is just one file. This is actually taken off the back porch of the Airbnb we're staying in. I know it was very rough to stay out there. A couple of interesting things. If we hit I for info, we can toggle and see what I was shooting this with. And I was actually shooting this with my 50 millimeter at 1.6. And I believe that I had a black mist, either like an eighth or a quarter cut of black mist. What black mist does, it reduces kind of the shadows, and it kind of kills the highlights and blooms it a little bit. It just softens up the photo. I was using this. I ended up making a big panorama out of this, but I didn't want to show you the panorama. But I want to show you kind of where I use some of the new tools that are in Lightroom, and some frustrations I still have kind of around that. So this is the before photo. There's been nothing done to this one. If we hit the I key, that little tab will go away. And so let me show you kind of where we ended up. Ooh, right, pretty cool. And so we're going to kind of work through it, and I'm just going to, this is like the Julia Child where I pull out the cake that's already been baking in the oven after I show you the ingredients. So what I was going for with this effect, and I'm going to show you how to do it, was more of like a vintage feel, more of like a painting feel than like a high contrast modern landscape. I wanted it to feel a little bit more timeless and old-timey. So that was going through my head when I shot this. Just that feeling of it could have been taken at any point, maybe in the last 50 or 60 years. So that was kind of what I was going through. I was kind of inspired by some of the like posters you see at Big Ben, some of the old like 1930s like vintage posters. So that's kind of what's going through my head. So I'm just going to do a live edit of this because I think this is really instructive. I will also say there are, if I zoom in, there are telephone wires. This is not a Lightroom function. I would take this into Photoshop and get rid of those. But in Lightroom, it doesn't do a great job of them, especially this pole right here being next to this century plant. That's not a good recipe for anything really. That's really tough right there. Okay, so let's flip over back to the original. And I'm just going to work through it. Let's do it again and kind of show you how I would do something like this. So first thing for me, it's always in camera profile. I created this was shot with my Canon R5, and I created, based on the Color Checker Passport version 2, I created my own color profile. So for this one, it's the R5 actual, because I accidentally shot it on, I did them wrong. I called them the wrong thing the first time. And so just that alone, it kind of brightens up my shadows, kills my highlights a little bit. It gives me more data to work with. If we look up here in the histogram, we can see we basically have two chunks of data, right? We basically have this shadow data and we have this highlight data. And so it's going to be up to us to kind of massage that through. So let me start by showing you my frustration, right? So my frustration is when I go and do the masking tool for the sky, right? Because we want the sky to be nice and saturated and awesome and all of that. And I have show overlay on so you can see what it's calculating. So it does a pretty good job, right? If I take this to 0, we can see that it does a pretty good job of, isolating the sky, except for this area right here, this top of the century plant. for whatever reason, that is not excluded when the sky. If we can kind of see that here. And so really what I would need to do before I go to make any big changes, I would want to go to subtract brush. I'm going to put the density at 50 just to give me a little wiggle room there. And if I was really, wanting this photo to look the most naturalistic, let's take that density down to like 33. I would brush out from the mask that yucca plant or century plant, because it's really not supposed to be part of my sky selection, right? This is actually in my foreground selection. And this happens to me a lot also on these edges right through here. Because I shot this at such a wide aperture, I shot this at 1.6. There's some fringing, and I'm going to show you how I take care of that as well. This 50 is not great wide open. There definitely is some fringing. And so sometimes it takes care of it, sometimes it doesn't. And so now, that's kind of what we see here. Some of that is the fringing because it's out of focus. That is actually chromatic aberration, pink and green on this side. I don't know if you can see that, but that's actually what that is pink and green. So let me zoom back out. And so now when we make changes, more of that century plant is excluded from my sky. So now as I go to make changes to my sky, it's not pulling all of that data. So it's a nicer way to blend, right? We don't want it to jump out because it'd be weird to have a century plant stalk that's white here and then doesn't maintain the same tonality in through the sky. So that's essentially what's going on there. So here is kind of the first use of the new tool. So I'm working in the mask, right? This is all in a sky mask. And now I have the ability here in curve to change the tone curve inside a selection. And this is a big deal. It may not seem like a big deal, but because this is highlights and shadows now, I can make adjustments visually and not have to worry about changing numbers. So I can make the dark clouds darker, I can make the bright clouds brighter, right? And I can make a very steep S-curve and add a lot of drama to that sky right off the bat. And I think that's a much faster way than playing with like highlight, shadows, blacks and whites, because it's visual, right? I can say, hey, I know this is blacks, let me pull that down. This is brights, let me pull that up. And so right away, it gives that sky more kind of permanence. Now, the other thing I would say about the sky tool, I wish there was a way to make a fuzzy selection here. So what I'm going to do is add another brush, again with a low density. And I'm just going to kind of paint in that edge that was getting a little bit halo-y. And that's probably the best way to say it, is it's getting that like sharpening halo, and I don't want that. So just with the not much density, and then with just the edge of that tool, I want to blend in that mask so that my edges aren't so halo-y and crunchy, right? The whole goal of editing is to make it look like no editing was done, right? Because if editing was done, it's like, oh, well, you edited that. It doesn't look like it takes you out of just enjoying the photo. It's like an amazing designer dress where you can see all the seams and like stitch marks, right? So we don't want to see any stitch marks. And so when those halos come in, that really bothers me. So in this case, all I'm doing is working with the sky. I'm not even going to flip it to work here, because the next thing we're going to do, let's take these shadows way up, because again, this is our foreground, all of that data there. Let's take those shadows way up and give it that more filmic look. Okay. Now I'm also going to take down texture, and I'm going to take down clarity. I want this to have a softer feel in all the areas except one. What I'm then going to do, come back with my brush tool, and I'm going to add back that texture plus a little bit more, and add back that clarity plus a little more. And I'm going to paint it on the area that I actually had in focus, which in this case is the mountain in the background. So we're just going to lightly paint that back in to make just that area have sharpness, clarity, and texture, because that's where I want your eye to go. Okay. Just in that center area here. I don't want this to be over halo-y and over sharpened. I just want the center area here, right? So let's look at that brush area, right? It's just that peak in the distance, and that's all I want to get more texture. Okay, and because I have that, then I could also, if I wanted, I could make that brighter, I could make that darker, I could do whatever I wanted. But in this case, just that area had more texture. Now we're going to go back to the sky because I want that sky to be a little bit warmer. So we're going to warm up the sky a little bit. Okay, just a little bit, plus 15. And so now we get that sunset feel, right? Yeah, it's looking good. Let's see if there's any questions real quick. Groovy curves. Yeah, what's up, Ron? What's up, Miguel? Hello, everybody. And so let me flip back over to the finished one to kind of show you what all was done. Same things. Oh, no, I didn't show you chromatic aberration. Go back to the original. So something that I think we don't know enough about. So under lens corrections, I'm going to take vignetting down. This was shot wide open, or pretty close to wide open at 1.6 on a 50 mil. And then there's also, if we look on these edges, if we zoom in, can y'all see this kind of pink and green fringing? The removed chromatic aberration didn't have enough there. And so we're going to go into manual, and then we can pick our eyedropper, and it's really the green that bothers me. And so we're going to get rid of that kind of fringed green. And I should have shot this at like 2.8 with this lens. Later I switched to the 85 because it's much better wide open. There we go. So it kind of picked up that fringing, and now it reduced that purple. It doesn't get all of it, but there is this tool. I used to have to use it all the time, especially with my old 85-18. Oh man, that thing had crazy chromatic aberration. But just sometimes you'll see it, especially like in this area here. This is all chromatic. This is not the best shot, but this is what that is. That's why this is purple through here, chromatic aberration. The other thing that, let me show you what all I did on this finished one. So we had a couple things. One, I wanted this blue to stay blue, and so this is a linear gradient from right to left. And all I did was take down the temperature. So on the right hand side it's blue, on the left hand side it's much more warm, and so that allows me to have this nice kind of a little bit of contrast from orange to blue in the sky. It makes it more visually appealing. I did boost my vibrance quite a bit. And then if you notice though, I didn't do anything to contrast here. So global contrast wasn't really applied. The areas that I did do contrast was in my selection. So in the sky selection, I did the contrast there, but I left the foreground completely contrast free. And then also we played a lot with the HSL. So I wanted my reds and oranges brighter, and I wanted my greens and blues a little bit darker. This is something I think that gets missed quite a bit is HSL panel. I think there's a ton of functionality there that we don't always get into. The other thing that I finished was some color grading. I wanted the whole scene to have more of an orange feel to it. So my midtones got orange. My shadows, I wanted that purple, right? If we think about late sunsets, especially West Texas, the shadows kind of end up having that nice purple hue to them. And so that's why I added just a little bit. I mean, it is just a touch of that purple magenta. And then for my highlights, it's kind of this yellow green. And so, which is the foliage, right? The foliage would be that yellow green. So all of that together kind of created this photo at the end that feels postcardy, which is what I was going for, less so than like absolute sharp, like high def. And this is all just one raw file, right? This is all just one little bit. So you can see I have this area where I did texture and clarity. I have this area that's just blue, and then I have my sky that I made a lot of changes to, right? Exposure, highlight, shadows. I warmed it up, and then I did that tone curve inside of that selection. Okay? So that's just the way that I use those tone curves. It's really nice. I think it's a lot faster. Yeah, groovy curves. I agree. Okay. So here's again, I'll just real quick, I'll just do it before and after just to kind of show you where we started, where we finished. And just another reminder, right? When we're out in the field taking photos, we're not taking photos. When we're out in the field, we're gathering data. Right, the photo on the left isn't a photo. That's just ones and zeros. The finished image, that's the photo. Okay, so just, we're looking at our histograms to make sure we're getting good data in the field. Okay, let's look at the next photo. Let's go to this one because Steven likes to mess with me. So Steven, is this from, I'm guessing this is from the Corpus Air Show. It's a very gray, very cloudy day. This was shot, again, if you hit the I key, it'll toggle the difference. So it looks like it was already supersized by right-clicking and photo enhanced details. So this was shot at 600 millimeters. I'm guessing on an R7, F9, kept everything sharp at 1/2000th of a second. So that's probably effective, like 960 mil, if I'm guessing that you shot this on the R7, which is a crop sensor. So those are my guesses. Am I right? Yep. Yeah, I don't know how you missed that shot either. You were standing right next to me when we took it. Okay, so let's take a look at this photo and kind of talk about what's wrong. First thing I want to look at is the histogram. So if we notice right off, this histogram is very little data. There is just a little peak of data right in the center, and there is nothing else in the frame. Right, everything is this hazy, soupy, whatever you want to call it. But it's a very narrow strip of data, and so it's our job to take that data and spread it apart, right? We want our highlights to be high, we want our shadows to be low, and pull that data apart. It's all concentrated very much in the center. You'll see this type of histogram with underwater photos. You'll see this type of histogram a lot of times with Milky Way photos. The range of data is very narrow. So it's up to us to expand upon that, okay? So I think for something like this, the first thing I would do is get my crop right. And so for me, we want that nice top, tight crop, and we're just going to bring it in where our action's filling the frame. Okay, crop tool is always the most powerful tool. One of my favorite architecture photographers from the 1920s, when asked how he got into photography, he said scissors, and that's always kind of stuck with me because even back then, scissors were the most important thing, right? Crop tool, and so that kind of gets us more into the action. Second, there is not, I know this was shot with an R7 because I have an R5 and an R6 profile and didn't pull up. And so for this one, I'm actually going to go to Camera Faithful. Camera Faithful is kind of the least impactful of the presets. Most of you have it in your cameras. It's going to be a very flat profile. It's not going to add a lot of saturation because I want to pull this out myself. And so if we look at it, this photo, everything is kind of washed out. So let's just go to tone curve first right here, right? We want to pull those blacks in, and let's just make a very steep tone curve to give us some contrast there. I'm not really worried about the sky just yet. That'll come in a little bit. But a very steep tone curve, right? Very steep, because we're working with that fine line of data. You might be tempted to just crank the dehaze, but I think that kind of overdoes it in this case. And so let's be a little bit more surgical in what we're trying to do. And really, for me, I don't care about the sky, so let's just get the planes where we want them to look. And then we'll worry about the sky later. So I'm really just focused on this. I don't care about all this other data just yet. We can go ahead and crank the vibrance because I know I like vibrance. Something like this for the hue and saturation, I might want just that yellow to really get brighter, right? I don't need the whole thing brighter. I just want my yellows to be brighter because that's kind of the blues will be taken care of later. And so that yellow I really want nice and poppy. So my planes are looking better. This might be where I come in with Select Sky. These new AI selection tools are really amazing. They work to probably 95% of accuracy. But you'll notice that one did it better this time than it did last time. Okay. If you take it all the way down, you can kind of see where it's going. Woo, right? See where our selection is. In this case, let's just take the temp down and let's, instead of these gray skies, let's make our gray skies blue. Oh yeah, now we're getting somewhere because we like blue skies better than gray skies. Yeah, it looks better, don't you think? Let's take this down a little bit. Maybe too much. Yeah. So this again, now we can actually tone curve again. We can make those skies more contrasty, right? And if you notice now, we're starting to separate out our histogram. You see that our histogram is getting wider and wider, and now the blues and the reds are separated instead of everything being chunked together. The other thing for me, kind of always, I like to do a focus gradient. Is kind of what I call it. It's where I edit to the center of the image, and then I make everything around it a little bit darker, just so your eye goes where I want it to go. Okay, this may be a little, it's maybe a little ham-fisted, but there we go, a little bit smoother, but it's starting to be more. And so if we now see that our histogram up here is really starting to get pulled out, and our blues are almost completely separated from our reds, yellows, and greens. So we've really done a good job without doing contrast here, without going crazy on dehaze here. I don't think clarity is going to add much to it. I might actually go a little negative clarity just because I don't need that sharpness, but I do want some texture. The texture and that smoke would be kind of fun. Okay. If you're more of a linear person, right, we might want to bring those blacks down a little bit. And that black's it's going to pull that histogram down this way, right? And then our whites are going to kind of push it back out. Okay. We can play with our shadows as liked. All right. Okay. So let's see the one that I edited more. There we go. So this is my actual attempt here. That texture 20, a little bit of clarity, a little bit of dehaze. So in this case, I actually went minus 20 on contrast. So as I toggle contrast, you can actually kind of see that histogram move. And so some of this is just visual, right? Some of it is just making that look. And this is, again, all inside Lightroom. I've done nothing in Photoshop. There's no generative fill. There's none of that just yet. I actually did 0 vibrance, but a little bit of saturation. You can see the steep tone curve, right? Very steep tone curve. And that's necessary because our source file was so narrow that we really had to push the center out pretty hard. So if we think about the steep tone curve as like the continental divide, anything that comes close gets pushed one way or the other out to the edges harder. Because we were playing with such a narrow band of information to start, we really have to be kind of put it over like an anvil to get it spit out to one side or the other. Because otherwise, again, our before and after, that's how flat it was. Okay, the source file on the left, can you see how flat that is? And so it's about expanding that data out. If you look at what my finished file is, look how much bigger that histogram is. Let me reset this so you can see. Look at that initial histogram. Look how narrow that is. And so it's all about us pulling that out. Okay. R5. Yeah. Was it? I wonder why I didn't pick up my R5. You sure? Okay. I trust you. Interesting. All right. So this next photo is from Miss Jess. And her comment was she didn't really love the greens, and she just the color toning just didn't work for her. And so before I get into it, let's just talk. A flash was used, and so a couple things that I noticed right off the bat. The color is just a little bit off because it's the raw file. It's not anything from the photographer. It's a little off to me. The greens aren't quite green. The reds are a little bit under. But also this area here, I can tell the flash was used because it's brighter than the road behind it. And so whenever I see a flash used like this, the first thing I always do is kind of a negative linear gradient to darken the bottom, right? If we really think about it, I'm just going to use this to draw a circle on where, right? This is where I want the viewer's eyes to go. Right, the leaves, the road, the bikes, they're all really just supporting cast members. And really, I really want your eyes to go to like here. Okay, that's really where I want your eye to go. So everything else needs to get out of the way of what's in this circle. Okay, this is the most important area. Let me delete that. And so for me, I usually start with either a crop or camera profile. In this case, my R6 profile. Okay, we change that. Let's just toggle back and forth. You can kind of see the difference in color reproduction there. Maybe not on YouTube, but I can see it on my monitor here. Second, I'm just going to crop down, make it a little bit more impactful, right? We want to bring your eyes to exactly where I want you to be, getting rid of some of this white space up there. Okay. And this is kind of a gray day too, right? Maybe there's a little bit of blue in the sky, but let's make it look like it's a nice sunsetty day, right? Who doesn't want to be on a country back road on their really cool looking bikes? And oh my gosh, look what is this thing? That thing's crazy. I don't know what that is, but is it a speaker? I don't know. It's massive though. You know, it looks like a fun little ride. So let's make this kind of into a photo. So first thing I'm going to do is come down to my HSL. I'm going to bring up skin tone, okay, red and orange, okay, and I'm going to bring down the green and yellow, okay. And so right away, that makes the skin tones brighter. It makes my foliage darker, right away. Let's get the color and the exposure. So I'm going to bump up that exposure, and I'm going to warm the shot up, okay. Yeah, somewhere in there. All right, so now it's starting to be more impactful. The problem is this bike, especially this area right in there, is a little bit brighter. So let's do a negative gradient. These are just some of the old tools, right? Old tools. But I'm just darkening this so that it doesn't distract from faces in their hands. Okay. And a lot of times I don't do all exposure. I usually do exposure plus highlights because it's not the dark things I want darker. It's the bright things I want darker. So I want to reduce my highlights. Let me say that again. A lot of times when I'm doing gradients, I don't use exposure. I use either highlights or shadows. And I can control if I want either the dark things darker or the bright things darker or brighter, depending on which way I'm going. Okay. Now let's create a little, this area at the top left. Let's just make it a little bit more sunset-y. So we are going to add temp to the top left. Okay. We're going to add a little bit of exposure. We're going to add some highlights. There we go. And so what this is doing, this is the mask here. And what this is doing is it's separating out these leaves from these leaves. And I'm going to amplify that even more. We're going to do another linear gradient. And this time we're just going to cool down the right-hand side of the photo just a little bit. Okay. But let's make them a little brighter. And so now the right and left-hand side have cool and warm contrast. And then let's add a radial. And we are going to do what we did, which is create a radial. We're going to invert it, and then we're going to darken the edges around it. Because I'm mean. Now, but what this is doing is everything outside the circle gets that -4. And so it's pushing your eyes closer and closer to the center of the frame. Okay, let's take a quick before and after. Can you see that here, the brightest thing is actually this reflection right there? So your eye is coming down to his right knee, basically. But by darkening this and brightening this area, your eye is now coming to here, here, and here, which is kind of what I want. Yeah. I've done nothing to vibrance. I've done nothing to any of that, right? We can crank the vibrance, right? Older couple, right? Let's knock down the clarity a little bit. Maybe add a little bit of texture. I'm actually been lately, I don't know why, but I'm pretty much negative clarity as a global adjustment for almost all my photos now. It's just something that, I don't know. I'm just kind of tired of all the halation. I just want my photos looking a little softer. But I usually add the opposite amount of texture. So if I'm -5 clarity, +5 texture, -10 clarity, +10 texture. I don't know. Just something I've been playing with. So yeah, so there's our before and after again. Let's flip over to the final kind of edit, pretty close, right? That's pretty close to where it was. I did adjust my tone curve here, and I did do some color grading, just a little bit, right? The center circle is still touching that center dot. And basically all I did was the midtones and highlights I wanted warmer, and I wanted to add blues to my shadows. And just because that's kind of the way our eyes see it, right? If you go outside, your shadow isn't really black. It's usually like a dark purple or a dark blue, or it's never, no, it's not never, but it's very rarely, your shadow isn't generally just black. It has other colors in it. And highlights, who doesn't want to have that nice summer glow to them? And so this is just a way to kind of add that back in. So anything that's kind of bright gets this yellow added. Everything that's less than a third gets blue added, right? The shadow is 0 to 33% brightness. Midtones are 33 to 66. Highlights are 67 to 100. And so basically I'm saying everything that's 33 and below gets blue. Everything that's 33 and above gets yellow golden. And if you notice this has this effect in this trees back here, this nice golden foliage, and you don't even notice the cooling over here, but it is. Yeah, you can see it there. It's actually -10 temperature on this side. Again, that focus vignette, I want everything darker except for the subject. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. I think when I denoised it and created DNG, it pulled out the camera info. Yeah. Steven, you're probably right on that. Probably right. Yeah, that was a tough shot. With objects in the distance through a bunch of haze, right? That's tough. So this, again, is just, I'm using tone curve, again, a lot more. And the fact that it's in our selections now, I think is great. Let's take a look at denoise, okay? So this was a Milky Way shot, also from the Big Bend trip. And this is this really cool building we found. Well, that some of us found. Ron didn't find it. We saw him driving around a lot, though. And if you notice, this building has red to it. And so right away, see how there's this red tone? But if I take away red, it makes the sky very green. And so I kind of want the building to be neutral. And this is where I would add a sky selection and bring that down. So let's do that. Because we want to independently adjust the color of the sky and the foreground. Because there's no one adjustment that'll make it right. If we take red out of the building, it'll make my Milky Way somewhat disappear. Now, if you notice, the sky did a pretty good job, except for this area there. Again, we can just add brush, right? We can continually modify our selections, okay, which is really nice. And so in this case, right, the sky is actually a little bit too bright. And so I'm going to pull down the shadows there. And then I'm going to boost the highlights, right? Kind of make that more, right? So inside a selection, I'm changing the tone curve. Okay. And so very simply, I've already gone from this to this by doing nothing else but selecting sky, adjusting that tone curve. And so we're bringing that data in. Not only that, inside that curve, I might want to add a little bit more red because that red filter and that red color, magenta, is a color that gets washed out of the Milky Way as we adjust the white balance. If I take this all the way down to blue, right, just to show you, right, I lose the Milky Way, the gas cloud. And so we actually do want some of that in there. So a lot of times we have to go back and add in that magenta, especially to the galactic core and some of the gaseous clouds. So yeah, right, we can kind of change that contrast there, brighten it up. That's pretty nice now, right? We're just changing the contrast of the sky. Very cool. Now, what I really want to show you is the denoise. So as I boost my shadows, this is obviously too much. This was shot at 6400, and I've just boosted shadows to 100. This denoise is obviously a lot. That's a lot of noise. But honestly, it's held pretty well. Like, it's not crazy coloration through here where it was lit, but in the shadows, you are seeing some of that pink and green banding. So that's not how I'd edit it, but just to show you what's there. And so this is my edit. before denoise, right? So if we zoom in again, we can see what's going on here, right? That pink and green, that magenta, right, is pretty pronounced. I've turned up the vibrance pretty high. And then I have, so there's that sky, right, where I changed my tone curve, added the magenta in. I inverted it. I took out the magenta to make this more of a naturalistic color. I created a linear gradient just to darken up the bottom of the screen because that was too bright. And then I created a linear mask, and then I added a second one with the same instructions. And so that's just kind of darkening up these edges here. But what I really want to show you, especially if you look at this area, denoise runs on your GPU. And let me show you where it is. I don't want to do it because it will crash everything. But if we go down to detail, it's where it says noise reduction, denoise. So you'd click on that. It brings up a dialog box. The photo I'm going to show you is just a before and after. It was run at 30%. Okay, so it asks you, like, how much do you want to do? And I put in 30. And so this is pretty astounding, really. So that banding is now gone, especially in the shadow area. And there still is some grain and texture. Okay. So let's zoom in. There's after. There's before. Okay. That's a huge difference, y'all. So this photo is probably after adjustments. Oh, I would bet it's somewhere in between like 6,400 and 12,800 equivalent. And I'm pulling up shadows from that. And so this is before and this is after. Now, I will say that running this took probably 2 minutes to process. It's a big file, right? It's a 45 megapixel file. It already has some selection tools done to it. But this was done at dialog 30. Now, that is the downside to Lightroom. There's not a lot of selection on where it gets applied, the strength or anything like that. It's kind of a dumbed down version of, and that's where I think that On One and Topaz have still the lead, is they give you a lot more functionality in control over how it gets denoised, whereas Lightroom is just a toggle. How much do you want? 0 to 100. I find somewhere between like 20 to 50 is kind of more my sweet spot. But you know, your usage may vary. Let's see if there's comments real quick. Yes, I am reading comments, so let me know. I will see them. But yeah, that to me, especially for the Milky Ways that we do, is pretty drastic. So if there's questions on that, throw them in the comments, and I will read them here momentarily. So again, we started from this, and really we started from that, and we made it all the way to here. And that's maybe a little bit too red in there, and I didn't really play with the galactic core more, dehaze or something. All right, maybe a little clarity. I'd probably come in and brush that in. I usually brush in at like 50-ish density. That way, it's just, if I make a mistake on where I brush, it's not a big deal. Or I might boost my whites. Maybe a little more texture. Maybe a little more clarity. So, you know, if I was going and fine-tuning it, I do a little bit more of that. But and sometimes at the end, the color, I'll just add straight magenta to my additions. Just a little bit. Just because that's a color that gets lost very easily in our editing. So, yeah. How we feeling? Pretty cool. Who shot with that? It was my shot. I'm assuming, Steven, that you mean the Milky Way shot? It's mine. You were holding the lights, though. You were holding the light. So, let's take a look at one more bonus one. This was from a recent senior shoot that I did. And so this is just straight out of the camera. I was trying to expose for the sky. She obviously would have been dark except for a light that was firing on her. But I wanted to be able to come back and show some of the building detail. And so let's just take a quick look at before and after. Okay. So we can see way more of this detail of the buildings now. But really what I want to show you is kind of something to consider. So I did a select sky to darken the sky here. But when I did it, it only did a little bit. Let's just do it again. Because a lot of times so see how it didn't get down in here and down in here. So again, we can add a brush for our adjustments. Right, we want to brush in there, and we want to fill in that area as well. But we also have a reflection over here. And so whatever I do to this to make it look natural, I want to do to this as well. Okay. So as I make my selections and changes, the reflection of the sunset changes at the same rate as that. But that was just kind of something to consider. A lot of times when I do like any type of reflection shot, I want to be able to make sure the reflection is matched of the original. Yeah. Are there questions for y'all today? I added light from. Yeah, you did. Yeah. You added light from the highway. I do have a shot of your headlights illuminating one earlier. The other thing that I do quite a bit, color grading, right? Shadows get blue, right? This is all my building shadows get that blue. Highlights get that kind of orange gold. And the kind of yellow green midtone just to split the difference. Again, balance here, that shifts. If as I go left, it adds more to the shadows side. And if I add right, it leans more to the highlight side. But just something to think about, just a little bit. But again, that circle, the adjustment is still touching the center. So it's maybe like a 5% adjustment, but it's just a little bit. I wouldn't recommend going like all the way, right? That's too much, right? We want that just very little bit of adjustment. A little bit in color grading goes quite a long way. But I think this is a good example of like exposing for that sunset so that I have the data, using my flash to illuminate my subject, and then using modern tools to kind of bring up those shadows in post, right? So a lot of people will shoot, natural light, and it's very underexposed, just so they can maintain their highlights, and then bring up everything kind of in post for the shadows. Yeah, let me see if there's questions. Seems very left heavy shot lightwise. Chris, what? Oh, on this one here? Are you talking about this portrait of Helena here? Yes, because I'm on top of a 10-story parking garage, and it was really hard for me to light the buildings across the street. And I was leaning over the edge of a railing with about a 200-foot drop, and so I couldn't get a light over there. If that's the photo you were talking about. But she grew up in the city, and so this is just kind of her. She wanted to have the city as part of her photo, so it's kind of fun. One of the reasons I like texture, though, especially is in hair. As we change texture, we can make that hair kind of stand out a little bit more, whereas clarity doesn't necessarily hit that as much. But yeah, just, I don't know. I've been kind of digging the softer feel lately. So let me show you the before and after again, just to kind of see it. But see how that shadow's really harsh. And so some of it was balancing that out as well, where we opened up the side of her face with, increasing our shadows plus 60. So something else that can be done a lot that I do at our tone curve is I don't let it go all the way to the top. So I'll bring it down just a little bit. And I'll take my shadow, instead of being all the way down at the bottom, and bring it up just a little bit. And so it raises that input right there. So it gives it more of a flatter look. So just taking down my highlights and just raising up my shadows just a touch, and it gives it that softer, kind of more vintagey feel, which is kind of what we were going for with clothing and styling. So, yeah, awesome. Yeah, city portrait. Yeah, it is very. So part of it, I had to do, her legs were very bright, so I had to kill the highlights there. I brightened up this side some more even, without getting too much. I tried to brighten this up as well with a big radial, and kind of put a focus vignette on her. All right, because I originally the right leg. If you look at the before, the right knee is actually the brightest part. Like it's actually, I mean, her cheek is probably the brightest, but that's pretty close. But to me, it's just amazing that how much data we can pull from our sensors now. So pretty cool, pretty cool. Any other questions? Ooh. No, I don't know where all my stuff is. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I'm using some of the new tools. Again, the select sky is awesome. Select subject, duplicate invert. Like those are all things that just make my workflow so much faster than it used to be. We used to have to do all of that manually. We'd have to brush in manually everything. And so when people come at me and say, I don't like AI in photography, like I bet you like those tools. So yeah, I didn't really get into like the new Photoshop generative fill. If anybody's played with the beta, it is crazy. I just added lightning to a photo I took this week, and I'll post that. But it's wild what it can do. Yeah, pretty crazy. So yay for Adobe for making new tools. Yeah, if anybody has any other questions, let me know. Happy to answer them. Yeah, I just kind of want to walk through kind of how I'm editing these days because it's changed a little bit. But there's so much you can do inside Lightroom now. It's weird. For a long time, I was using Photoshop less and less and less and less because I could always do more and more and more in Lightroom. But now with the new Photoshop beta, I'm actually been playing inside Photoshop more with the generative fill and doing some different things there that I wasn't really expecting. And so that's been very neat. And that's kind of taken some of the time, experimentation time for me of going through that. So I'd love to see some of y'all samples. Hit me up with some of your cool samples on that, generative fill and all the cool things Adobe. Otherwise, y'all have a great rest of y'all's nights. Thanks for watching episode 33 of Josh Says Mean Things. Wee.